Yeah. It's a big joke that I'm part of the tech team.
Yeah.
Tech with limited abilities, but I'm getting better every week doing this.
Just makes it good.
I think it does. And then when I came back from, I was away for 4 days, and they had already said I was gonna get a new laptop at work. And they were moving the files to a different server. So it's been an interesting week at work right now. So and then today I was like, oh, I'm not finding some of my stuff.
Oh, boy.
And my mom said, that's okay, because a lot of it wasn't there either that she was looking for. Going, well, where did they put it when they moved files to a different server? So we're getting there. So that's been my week so far, and I'm like, okay. I said, I'm gonna go and be tech person at Templeton. Yeah, today, she goes, well, maybe you did, I go, listen, I saved it, the same place I saved all those other ones that are showing.
So you'll be able to get it.
I said, so, and I go, well, good thing was, I go, for some of the stuff that I'm looking for, I sent it to the employees in an email, so I know there are attachments in emails somewhere right now. It's funny, I was like, bring me. So how did you hear about this?
I just read it somewhere.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great. Yeah, so this is, I will say this, the one with Indigenous was like history.
Yeah,
And spirituality
Yeah,
and everything rolled into one, which was really fascinating.
that's nice.
So I'm thinking this is gonna have a different take.
Yeah.
Two, it's all gonna depend.
Mystical tradition, we'll see.
Yeah,
Are you part of the congregation here?
yes, I am.
I have always wondered about this congregation. I see it as the more reformed congregation or more left-leaning or.
Probably, I'm
Yeah.
gonna say we're
But
probably,
I didn't know, I don't know.
I'm gonna say, yeah, because we have a big social action committee,
Oh, okay.
a lot of different, like, we were very open.
Yeah. I've always kind of sensed that, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I would say we're probably a little more.
Is the temples in town, do they cooperate or anything?
Yeah, we're all very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do a lot. Try to do and coordinate with codage, which is.
Yeah.
I know, we gotta turn the camera.
I was wondering if there was a whole Middle East situation cause a split. Within Judaism, like just, people having very different polarizing views.
People do.
Yeah,
I think we try to. See, so everybody's opinions matter.
yeah. As a mindset, just
Yeah.
that mindset, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's what makes it, trying to state, because everybody's opinion matters. And everybody looks at things from such a different way.
Yeah, sure.
And our rabbi is from Israel.
Oh, wow.
So you can see if somebody's in the waiting, it comes up in the room.
Okay.
My old age sitting. My old age sitting. It's getting harder and harder to.
Get up and down.
Yeah.
Well, I had stopped going to this class I used to go to those body pump, which would probably kill me now, but there was so much down and giving up, I just can't do that anymore.
Look on television.
I don't, what is this? I don't look at my stuff. Ah, that's better. I'm hoping about that. Good retrieval. Okay. Don't I look?
How's everything in your life?
Okay, getting ready to, I told Monica, we're not gonna be here and going to Oregon for May,
Oh, what's in Oregon?
Aaron's family.
Oh,
I haven't seen my grandson in a year,
okay.
so, and it's baseball season. And he plays baseball.
Okay, so how do you get there? You
We're
drive?
gonna, I mean, it's an all-day flight, but I rented a, like a condo near them, so I don't have to stay with them like you do.
Yeah.
So, and they're working and he's in school, so
Oh, yeah.
we'll do
You'll do
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
have friends out there, and take some trips and day trips.
yeah. Flight to California did me in.
Huh?
My flight to California did me in. We went to California for
For your
Passover,
Passover,
yeah,
right.
and I don't know, I just, first of all, either I'm getting bigger or the seats are getting smaller. And secondly, the time difference, it really
It
kills
really
me.
does, yeah.
By the time I get used to it, it's time to come back.
Yeah, well, that's why we're doing it, even when we go there to visit them. I don't wanna go for 3 days, it's
Yeah.
too far.
Yeah,
So we always go for at least a week and this time I suggested this, and they were all for it, so try it.
we're going down to Nashville in May because he's graduating high school, going to England for college, so
So it's exciting.
it is.
Oh, very nice.
Monica said we'll stay, this time she'll stay, she said we'll stay for a while. And managed to have a little fender bender with the car. So hopefully we'll be.
You have a car down there or?
No, we drive down.
Oh, you drive.
Drive down. Flying is, well,
Oh, yeah, down there you could do it.
a Velo, I don't know what they used to have a flight, but I won't fly a Velo.
Wow.
And Delta takes about 6 hours because you have to change somewhere. And it's just, at one time, Monica did fly and flights were delayed, took forever. We have the dog.
Oh, right, that's right.
So we drive down, it's, we do it in 2 6 hours.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, going out, Alan you know, coming back, Oregon, it's always red ups. Those just do us in. Well, he booked it in such a way, we'll be going out there, we'll be traveling all day, we'll get there, it'll be late, you know, it's 3 hours early, but we can just go right to our place and go to sleep. They said that they would go when they. The daughter-in-law actually said she'd go shopping.
Hi.
I'm Douglas Brooks.
Hi.
Anyway,
Miss
so we're gonna
Stacy.
try. If it works out.
Stacy.
Stay for this graduate.
Lovely.
Well, at least I have Zoom.
That's, I was doing, that's good.
By, I don't know.
Yeah, so you can project on the screen if I have.
We've had that place for.
Do you have like or a
No, I just want,
presentation?
I just want to get to YouTube. Can we do that?
So,
Yeah.
We got.
Doesn't matter.
Sure, I'll use somebody else who knows how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to do it. It's
Yeah.
your hour.
We'll go for additional help from the audience.
You just would hit more, share, right? If you want them to see it as well. But for us, I mean,
It's fine, yeah.
I'll just go to the internet.
The dog is there.
We just have to go, okay.
Yeah.
But now we can, in 6 hours, it's gonna. Yeah.
So we may need some help.
We were driving down the falls and she's like, we were over several days. Sounds good. I don't know. It's not right to not be able to share. Like that.
We've got three.
I'm good, how are you?
We're in New York. It's in New York.
Oh, that's New York.
Oh, please.
It's probably New York.
Really?
Yeah.
Sydney. And you let me.
Now, well,
Yeah.
you trying, we haven't been down for a while, and this time we took the last year, we went down, we took the.
4 years.
Wow.
Hi.
How did that work? I was thinking of taking the
Hi,
train.
Douglas.
I'm very
Hi, there. These are just translations of poems. Hi.
long, but you can read, and there's Wi-Fi.
Douglas.
Douglas, I'm Lester.
Nice.
Nice to meet you, Douglas.
These are translations of poems.
Hmm?
These are just translations of poems. I think we're gonna talk about them, or maybe. We'll see.
That, it's me. Those stupid hearing. Just got hearing aids, but I forget to wear them, so.
What?
Yeah,
Sorry. That's not
you
true.
got it, right.
So, yeah, there's a show I wanna see it. The reason I never think the name of it is.
It's me?
Yes,
Right.
yes. I mean,
I wouldn't see it.
it looks like it.
I just see stuff, but the sucker.
Yeah, I know it's like this, I think it. It's like, radio and I get Broadway shows. I've heard music.
Yeah. I didn't get the best word, we really liked, so I'm coming to.
Well, it's gonna be good.
But I wrote about that.
Yeah, I've seen some of the clips, it's hysterical.
And this,
Oh, you know, it's based on,
world something, yeah, it's true.
yeah, when they dress up the body and serve it to,
Yeah.
they floated it to, I forget what country. So, yeah, German, that's where they were going.
Oh, I knew it was about the, World War II.
Yes, yes. And so. And it worked. It worked. Because they landed in. Where was the big.
So how was your course before
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
Oh. So it was like, they were trying to make that was.
You have, like, how many of these?
So anybody?
Today, they're all for you.
And I was just checking in case somebody was in the waiting room.
I see, I see.
What were these in Sanskrit
They
or?
were originally in, they were in Vedic really, which is a much older language.
Oh, so you.
I'll tell you
You
something.
translate?
Yeah, yeah, I did.
Impressive.
Beats work. Little fine. I won't get that. I've got that. I can shout.
No.
Can reach the back of any. Ah. The meter running?
There's no chance.
Okay, that's good. That's close.
And it's cool. They started nothing, I didn't know, so I just.
So I did give you some of the sense from.
Yeah.
These are translations from the oldest poetry we can.
One woman. Catch the class, you know. Yeah, you learned something, yeah.
Oh. I think we had, I made 30 copies.
Okay, and then I can just pass on to people from me.
Sure, I mean, they have to be, they're 3 pages.
Okay, yeah.
They're
which
numbered, so you won't, so it's not, you know, it's not too bad. I don't know how far first we'll get, we just. Yeah. Better to be over than under.
So we always only get so far when we just.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see what we're talking.
Yeah, discussion gets interesting.
Yeah, see what it is. We can get to YouTube, it's a good joke. I mean, I can get it on my computer.
Yeah.
It's almost everyone in the room, maybe except you.
Because of the last show.
Will know this, Jeff.
Yeah. There's a lot of.
Okay.
Right, pretty sure they died.
Okay.
Nicer.
Oh, they told it, yeah.
Yeah.
At least you can do it.
My mother went to high school with Lou Costello.
Was high school what?
My mother went to high school with Lou Costello.
Oh.
So I was in Patterson, New Jersey. I was in Bud Abbott, and yeah. We've got an Abbott and Costello joke inside 5,000 year poetry. It's a good gig.
They would be so proud.
There would be something.
Yeah, if I see the blue thing come out, I'll just come up with them then.
Meter's running, wanna go for it, we'll keep you on,
Sure.
see how you're doing. My name's Douglas Brooks. Hi. Hi, I'm professor of religion at the University of Rochester. And I've been here a long time. So, David Hume, remember David Hume? Scottish philosopher. Taught like this. My father taught like this. So my father was Scots. And he taught like this. And the drunker he got, the more he taught like this. Which means he taught like this all the time. He was like that. So, and I just said, my mother was an Italian, first generation Italian immigrant. She grew up in Patterson, New Jersey. And my parents met at the outset of World War II. I won't tell you that much about myself because that's boring. But they made that kind of move out of the immigrant community in New Jersey from sort of what was then the immigrant conclaves in the sort of madman era of the 50s. So I was born in Teaneck, New Jersey.
All right.
Yeah. And sort of have a strange pride in saying that we were an incredibly diverse and welcoming community. So we were the first community in America to willfully, deliberately, self-consciously integrate the school system and do all of that from 1964 when I was just entering, I was a little kid. So I was just in kindergarten. So, and I grew up in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. And those are all my friends and feel a warm affinity to the conversations. How many bar mitzvahs have I been to? All those kids I went to school, right? So and I love them all dearly. And of course, some of them had very interesting sort of other stories, like the kid around the block. His father was involved in camp liberation. Was a warrior. And he makes me cry because he was such a humble and beautiful and wonderful man, and really never talked about it until it was that very late in life time to talk about it. So I feel deep. I have a very warm connection to that part of my past. So part of the reason that's kind of part of the story just to tell is that somewhere around 10 or 11, I got bar mitzvah in. Because like all my pals are going to Hebrew school in the afternoon, and I think I've got the sort of, we didn't call it FOMO in those days, but fear of missing out. So, and I came from this kind of mixed household. My mother was very innocent Italian girl from Patterson, and my dad was Scots and Presbyterian, so like what are the chosen frozen? I've got, by the way, quite a bit. Douglas digression. I have a joke for everybody. I'm an equal opportunity offender. Let's see if I can get everybody involved. So I wasn't really particularly raised religious because there's a long sort of story of my mother's sad story with the Catholic Church and from childhood, and then my father, like Presbyterians, like whiskey, money. What else did they think? Plus God's already decided, so predestinate. They weren't religious. But I'm a child of the late 50s, right? So like everybody belonged to something.
Yeah.
Like everybody belonged to a church or not. So their compromise was the Catholic Junior Varsity. That's the Episcopal Church. Smells and bells. And that's I gained from the Episcopal Church sort of three things before I had my own personal crisis of you've got to be kidding me. Right. So and the first was that I gained a love of ritual and of kind of the elegance of the church. Say what we will about it. Like God likes it when you stand here and not there. I got that idea. And I got it pretty clearly. And then the love of music. And then I was really lucky because I got a job as a teenager at the Riverside Church in New York. At the height of the Civil War, Freudian slip to what's about to happen. Height of the Civil Rights era. So we had this thing, and there's a gigantic, monstrous, beautiful instrument in the Riverside Church. It's a five register Aeolian Skinner organ, and I worked for the pipe organ builder. I was apprenticed to the pipe organ builder. That was kind of like officially my job. So it was like really cool. So I got to work on this gigantic thing, and it was and the church had the first like sort of public radio station in the basement that played like all the cool music, and jazz people played on Sundays, and the people who took me in were gracious and brilliant and lovely and gave me something of a cultural education that I didn't otherwise have. Does that make any sense? Like we hung out with Murray Kempton and those sorts of literati kind of people who were hanging around the civil rights movement, and I was just a teenager. I was just a kid. But it did sort of nurture my interest in the history of religions. And then the third thing that happened is I had the you gotta be kidding me moment. So, which means that, so go back to a little bit of the story about my bar mitzvah envy. So my parents didn't go to church, right? Because that like wasn't their thing. It was just sort of the thing they belonged to. So so I say to my dad, Pops, we take me to church on Sunday. And kind of looks at me because like that. My dad lived to be 93. I don't think he spoke 93 words. Because well, there's another good one. Like when I turned 18, that was the legal drinking age. When I was a kid, turned 18, go pick up my dad from work, sitting in the bar. I think I can drink with my father. I sit down, I go, Pops, you're having the usual, shivers and water, no ice. My dad looks at me and goes, son, did you come here to drink or did you come here to talk? So, break this up, that's really true. So it's like a Sunday morning, and I come downstairs, like church, never like been to church, really, like basically, I'm 11 or 12. And my father looks like it's any other Sunday morning, so I'm wondering what he's doing. So I get in the car, he drives me, we drive over to the church. He reaches over, opens the door, and he goes, it's in there. Like, so I'm a kid from Jersey, so that's like a dare. Like, you can't go no then. Like, no, can't chicken out. So I walk in. And anyway, to fast forward that story, I ended up the altar boy. Figure this out. At the 8 o'clock, you know how it's like 8 and 10, like two services, like the 10 is for like Sunday school and families. No, I'm at the 8 o'clock with the ancients in the quiet room because my family doesn't go to church, just me. What kind of a kid is that? Like, you gotta be kidding me. So it took a couple of years for me to figure out that, like, maybe I needed a revision on this whole idea of like what they were talking about. But that didn't, and and we probably remember that somewhere in that, what we called it junior high school, but like middle school experience, you get that sort of half a year exposure to the world. Like here are the Egyptians, like here's ancient India, here's China, like here's the Buddhists, what's with that? And of course it's 1970-ish, and East is coming west. And the good news is I also had another conversion experience. Can I tell you about that? February 9th, 1964, 8:13 p.m. in Patterson, New Jersey, in my grandmother's living room. Ed Sullivan came on and he said, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles. And I said, you could do that. Then you find out, like, well, actually you can't do that, and then you figure out something else to do because they're that good. But anyway, that's another piece of the joke. And so I came sort of through high school, still involved in the church, but kind of in the social gospel of the liberal church of Riverside. Like, no one talked about religion, they just wanted to make lives better. Like, it was the civil rights movement. Plus, I worked for the crazy musicians. And let me tell you, like, that world is really fantastically insane. Like, the people who play those monstrous pipe organs are very interesting people. And of course, immensely, strangely talented, So anyway, by the end of high school, it was also the end of the Vietnam War. So I'm just young enough to have missed the draft. Like just missed it. And so, but had all of that, but had an elder brother who didn't. And that's another part of a story. So I left for college, and that was sort of the beginning of, well, what do I want to do? And so I was lucky that way. So I'll fast forward it. I went to Middlebury College. This was 1975, and in those days, every kid studied abroad. Like the college emptied out for the junior year, like everyone. And Mid had all of their own programs. Like they had Middlebury College in Paris, they had one in London. Like they were on this, and it was sort of part of their reputation because they were a language school. Well, I I had my first semester taken an introduction to world religions. And the guy who taught that, I think back on that guy now, I think he knew a lot for an amateur. Like, and by that, and let me be gracious about that. His specialty was German Romantic philosophy. So he read, like, let's say, Goethe, Schilling, Schlegel, the beautiful poetry of that lovely world spun out of that cultural world that had this ancillary relationship to a broader understanding of the world, a more inclusive understanding. And so he gave me this first introduction, and the syllabus was long, and I look back on that and I think he really did know a few things. I mean, many of the sources that he chose, 50 years ago, are still very often the best choice. Like, that scholarship has endured, and he sort of understood. So while he didn't, when I call him an amateur, I mean that in the sweetest way, he didn't read the original materials in Vedic or Sanskrit or in the Indian languages, Pali or Tibetan or those languages. And that's what I would think now as the person whose life has been spent studying the material. That's sort of what separates the sheep from the goats. Like, do you do the stuff in the original? Or who are you leaning? And so my interests were deeply personal as much as they were historical and linguistic and scholarly. And so while all my friends like split to eat tapas in Barcelona or sit in the cafe in Paris, I saw this poster that said study a year in India. And I thought, what is that? So one little more piece of the story. So I had to sort of legitimize this with my folks, because while my dad was kind of a self-made professional, he was an architect, but he had come through it sort of through the ranks in a certain way. He was a registered architect and a very sort of elegant and well sort of self-managing person. Does that make sense? But he never graduated college. Like, so my dad was a registered architect and never graduated college, which you could still once upon a time do, because he was in the 1930s. I don't know. So what I'm saying is my parents weren't really educated people. And so by the time I was sort of going off to college, I had no idea. Like, they had sort of a clue. Like, when I turned down Yale, they got really upset. Like, that was a name they could sort of register. And I go, you're going where? Like, I kind of looked at my dad and go, you've been to New Haven? Like, anyway, so this was 1970, right? So anyway, the short of it is, I had to figure out how to get to India, and it was a legitimate college year program. So it was administered by the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and they had been doing it for a long time. And the character at the center of that program is now sort of a legend in the history of world religions and South Asian religions, and because almost everybody in my profession went through this guy. His name was Joseph Elder. He was saintly, lovely soul. He was really a great guy. And he got gave a lot of folks their step, like their chance. So I go to my my father, and I say, I don't know, it's the other way around. I went to my mom, and I said, look, Mom, there's this college year program. It'll cost you less than college, and I'll get all the credit. I want to go to India, which might as well have been Mars. And she looks at me and she goes, you'll have to ask your father. So I went to my father and I go, Pops, I want to go to India on this college program. Remember, this is the guy who doesn't talk. So then he looks at me and he goes, did you talk to your mother? And I said, yeah. He goes, okay. The one thing I could be sure of is that they wouldn't talk to each other. So I got it. So that's how I finagled my way into, like, they both, like, at some point they must have looked at each other and he goes, you let him go? No, you let him go. Anyway, it was supposed to be 7 or 8 months in a summer program of intensive language instruction, and that was all fine, but I stayed 2 years. And what happened in the process is that I wanted wanted to study, there's an ancient book about the study of ancient India called The Wonder That Was India. And it's still a very good book. It was written by an Oxford Don in the post-war, like 40s, 50s. And it's kind of an encyclopedia of ancient history and sort of the history of the subcontinental religions. And it's got a chapter on everything, like just every kind of subject. And I eventually met Professor Basham, who is a lovely man. He bore a startling resemblance to Mr. Wizard the Lizard. Does anyone remember that cartoon with Tooter the Turtle? There was a lizard who looked like who dressed in a wizard costume, but he was an alligator. And he drizzle, drazzle, drazzle, drone, time for this one. Anyway, Professor Basham was a figure to be seen. He looked like a wizard. Anyway, I read his book and I was romantic and young and thought that was India. And then I arrived in India.
Yeah.
And, so, but fast forward to get to where we're going. I wanted to study not only the culture and history and the people. So they sent me, I had originally applied to go to the ancient city of the Hindus, to Benares, to Kashi, to the place where every Hindu goes for pilgrimage. It's a very important place. Benares, it's called usually. Hindus go there to die. There's a death industry in Benares. That's where they cremate. It's a thing. And Benares was a very ancient center of learning, just a sidestep away from where the Buddha gave his first sermon. It's all over the literature. But the wisdom of the program, and this I must say I had no idea, was that they assigned me not to Benares, but to Madurai. Now Madurai is deep, deep in South India. So if you go down to modern Chennai, modern, what they used to call Madras, down there on the southern coast, and you keep going further down, right in the middle of that is probably one of the 3 or 4 longest continuously inhabited places in the world. So as cities go, its only comparison are the most ancient places in the Middle East for continuous habitation. Like not just an ancient city that's in ruins, but a place where 15 feet below you, it's 10,000 years ago, and just keep going. Like it's just worlds all the way down. Now, deep in South India, in those folks speak the Tamil language. And Tamil belongs to its own linguistic group. So those folks and the languages around that South Indian world also belong to the same language group. It's called the Dravidian language group. So Tamil is one of the most ancient resources for the study of subcontinental worlds because the Tamils have been there. Well, here's another good, can I tell you another good story? So during that very same time, I ended up getting good at Tamil. Tamil's really hard, and it sounds like 330 million butterflies, and it's got 1,000 dialects, and so it can be sort of trialsome to learn. But during the second year I was there, I'm only 19, 20 years old, there was a typhoon, it was a hurricane. And a group of doctors came who were kind of the beginnings of Doctors Without Borders. It was before it kind of crystallized, and they were Canadian doctors. And so I went with them into this village because it was wiped out and and I could translate some. Not perfectly at that point, but I could get a little bit by. Anyway, fast forward decades, and those folks were among the people who did the genetic studies of the peoples of that village who were of a particular South Indian caste, like they were very indigenous South Indian people. They're Dravidian people, and that then further that ahead. And the result of the study of the genome of those folks, not unlike the study of the koans on the beaches. Does everyone know that story? I'll tell you that too. So there's a genetic marker, basically, in this village that ties these South Indian people closer to Australian Aboriginals and people in Papua New Guinea than anywhere else in the world. That means these folks have been there the better part of 65,000 years, like as long as human migration has happened. So these folks, and they speak and their ancient languages as old as the poetry I gave you, which is Veda. and it's alive and well. And Tamil from the Sangam age, which is the same age as the poetry I'm giving you, is probably 1800 before the Christian era. It's a long time ago. Even that literary language is not appreciably different from the way they speak today. Like, it's a very old place, and it's very insular. Languages are either mosaic languages travel, and other languages don't. And English is the kind of the paradigm of what we call a mosaic language. Wherever it goes, it becomes kind of infiltrating and compromising all the rest of it and assimilating. It's kind of like the Star Trek Borg, like resistance is futile, you will be assimilated. Like, that's what a mosaic language does. But isolate languages draw a pretty careful circle around themselves. So Tamil is the source of other South Indian languages like Kannada and Malayalam, and names it doesn't really matter, but there are 75 million Tamil speakers today still in the world. That's a percentage. And all of those other languages come from that very ancient source. Now, somewhere around, so let's just say that what really happened, I'll finish my story just to get me out of the story. So I arrived in South India 19 years old, and I kind of quickly realized that the 5 other people they sent me with were kind of not really going to be my best pals. So I move out into pretty funny into a little like sidestep apartment, so I could be very near the great temple of the city of Madurai. So they sent me to Madurai is again it's the most ancient city of the ancient Tamils, and in the center of that city is a temple that's 14 square acres, 5 towers over 160 feet. It's one of the great monuments of the world. And next time I'll show you pictures. How's that? Okay, and I'll give you the tour. We can see what the temple is like. So I moved a block away from the temple so that I could be at the temple doors at 3:30, 3:45 in the morning. And then if you kind of went with, how shall I say? I went native. That's the best way to put it. Like, so, and the way that happened is I just showed up like serious and sincere. Just wanted to walk in, just respectfully, just on my own. And if you got there at the crack of dawn with the priest, they were like, "Come on in, like you're obviously here for that," So I developed this relationship with the priest of the temple, and we'll tell you more about what it's like inside a Hindu temple. And they were kind of fascinated that like there's this kid who's interested but at the same time I had this academic program. And the good news is that the professor of Sanskrit and Indic languages had just returned from a long sabbatical where he had been teaching in Malaysia and Singapore, and he came back to India. Fast forward 3 months later, so I go see him every day. I have language class. Go to the temple in the morning. I have Tamil language classes in the morning. Then I have a little lunch, and then I spend the afternoon. I go to see this Sanskrit professor because that's a whole different world, a whole different language, a whole different cultural feature of India. 3 months later, he says, it's a lovely story, and I can tell you the story is kind of fun, but I want to get to what we're talking about, so I don't want to talk about myself. But except to say, the first day I met him, I'll just tell you this thing. I was introduced to him by my Tamil professor, who was this lovely woman. She was brilliant, caring, considerate person. They had brought her over from South India to Madison, Wisconsin for those 12 weeks. I brought her to my home in New Jersey. We went back to India, and she kind of like took care of me because I was the wayward kid, and I was the kid interested in that. And so she introduces me to the man who becomes my teacher, my Sanskrit teacher. And on that first day, I've already seen a lot of teachers. I've gone to ashrams and seen swamis. I've been talking to the priests in the temple. I've gone to the other parts of the university, and I'm thinking that book that I was reading called The Wonder That Was India, that they had hit the mark, that this show was over, that world that I was interested in, which was culture, language, spirituality, religion, was long gone. And so when my Tamil teacher said, I'll introduce you to the Sanskrit professor, she said, well, he's comes from a very Orthodox family. I don't know, how he'll address you. I mean, it's the university, so in some sense he's going to welcome me, but we're talking about castes. We're talking about Orthodox priestly Brahmins. And it's a very self-considered world. It's a very insular world. We can make some comparison in a moment to that. But so I was sitting with him that very first day, and I just sat quiet because I wasn't sure what to say. I'd seen like a lot of other people who were sort of participants and keepers and stewards and scholars of the tradition. In each case, I was successively less impressed. Plus, I'm from Jersey. So I got a little bit of attitude about like, you got game or not? Because that, can you do this? I've been sold a lot of nonsense. Plus, I just escaped the church. So you gotta figure, there was a whole lot of like, you gotta be kidding me going on. Like, really? This is what's left? So anyway, I sit with this man, and she introduced me, and he's lovely, thoughtful, and he just sits there, and for the first, literally, 5 minutes, he just twirls a pencil. Just sitting across from me. Now, I have learned 2 eyes open, 2 ears open, 1 mouth shut. Because it's like sitting with an old rabbi. You know what I mean? Like, it's just disrespectful to speak first. That would be the tradition. And that much I knew. So when he finally looks up at me, pulls his glasses down, looks up at me, and then in the Queen's English, which completely freaked me out. Like, my teacher didn't speak with a really dense Indian accent. He spoke the Queen's English. He said, now what would you like from me? Like, I'm 19, 20, I'm completely freaked out. I have no idea what to say. So I look at this guy and I go, I want to know everything you know. And he looks back at me and goes, that could take some time. So if you like, you can come back tomorrow. Every day for the next 16 years of our relationship, he would end the day by saying, if you like, we can study tomorrow. Because it was never an obligation. It was always an invitation. It was never an inculcation. It was never a conversion. It was never a dogmatic matter. It was take this to your heart's desire, take this to your interests. And then so one day, many years later. And then 3 months later, after that first initial meeting, he said, if you like, you can come, because he knew I lived in this cowshed. If you like, you can come stay with us. So I was invited to live with the family. And these were Orthodox South Indian Brahmins. This would be like being, I don't know, like invited into an Orthodox Jewish home. Does that make sense? Like all in, where there's custom.
Hindus?
Yeah, these are Hindus. These are Hindus. But I'm trying to give a comparison. Like this would be, this is a world of orthopraxy, right? So that's another interesting thing about Hindus. They're not so interested in orthodoxy, correct views. When you walk into a Hindu temple, they never ask you about your beliefs. It's how like when you walk in the Vatican, you go, ooh, like the weight of dogma, like the weight of you're supposed to think things, is there. Hindus aren't like that. Hindus are interested in a Hindu temple, like stand here, don't stand there. Like it's the orthodoxy is practice. So we call it orthopraxis, not orthodoxy. Right? So it doesn't matter, you don't have to have correct views, you just have to behave well. Like, that's basically it, like behave yourself, right? And when you move into an Orthodox Brahmin home, that's a lot of rules. Like where your feet are, when you get up in the morning, what hand you use for all kinds of things. There's a custom, a habit, a rule for everything. Now the good news is that his children were little, and they would be like, do it this way. And that also helped, like, then I also got the immersion because the other elders of the house didn't speak English. and his children wanted to learn more English, but the deal was I would speak in Tamil, and we would swap back and forth. So I was in that, and it's difficult to describe in only one way, that many years later, was I was sort of involved in the academy, no one believed the story, because Orthodox Hindus don't do that. Like, that is just not how it goes down. And yet, but my teacher, on the one hand, sustained a very a deep and abiding commitment to tradition. But he was also clearly a revolutionary by inviting me to live in his house, and was making a social statement in his community about caste. Because, like, here's this foreigner who lives in the house. And the word in the Sanskrit language for barbarian is, first of all, you know, the origin of the word barbarian is Greek, right? And it refers to people who can't speak. So the Greeks called them barbarians because they go ba 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 ba. Like, they can't speak. That's literally the etymology of barbarian. In Sanskrit, it's the same kind of a word. It's the word mlecha, and no other Sanskrit word begins with the sound mlech, which is tantamount to say these people can't speak either. So if you're the mlecha, you're not, like, as academia and colonialism and the world unfolded, it's 1970 in the universities. So you would expect that there would be some kind of academic place for us to connect. But to invite someone into the family, that would be a long, long reach. And his brother-in-law, who lived in the same house, had the tonsure, the 3 pieces of cloth. He was all in. He was a community priest. And so even my presence in that house would have interesting ramifications for the whole family. And I can tell stories about that all night, because there were many people who visited who would, well, I'll just tell you what. Once we had a visitor who came from that very kind of Orthodox view of the world, where you don't mix. These folks don't mix with those folks. That's very much part of that ancient world in its own way. And he's sitting there, and he comes in, and he doesn't realize I speak Tamil. And he says, "What is it doing here?" And my teacher's mother, who was well into her 80s, and wore the sari of a orthoprax South Indian widow, and was the most Orthodox woman in the world, looks up at this old Brahmin and says, "He is the only Brahmin in the house." Meaning, points to me. So she was my fierce defender, and which was such an act of love that it still gives me the trembles. But so I was welcomed into that world, and effectively sort of never really left. When I wanted to continue my studies, my teacher, who was professor in the university in the subject, told me to come back here instead. He said, "You'll always live in 2 worlds. Your degree here will mean more." And he was the one who sent me to graduate school at Harvard. So then fast forward again, in 1986, I was 29 years old, and William Scott Green, who was the founder of the Department of Religion and Classics at the university, hired me. I was, like I said, like a puppy. Like, my hands and feet were still too big. You know what I mean? Like, I was just out of graduate school, and gave me my step, and gave me a chance. And I see, and Rochester has been good to me, and I'm grateful to have had that job. I was tenured in '94, which is a long time ago. And what that gave me was, let me say this about what tenure is really supposed to be, especially in the humanities. Tenure is supposed to separate excellence from mediocrity. That's its job. Because if you have the promise of a certain invulnerability, your job is to pay forward the power you've given and to protect honesty. Now, that's been abused and overtaken by people who haven't, I think, lived up to its promise, its purpose. But its purpose is that you can say to the dean, "I think you're wrong." Like, you get to talk back to the boss, right? Because they can't fire you for that. Now there's rules and protocol to it, but it's there to protect a kind of honesty, a clarity of mind, a kind of, you can say, so because one of the great features that I learned from my own teacher in India is that the only thing more dangerous than ignorance is certainty. And
That's for sure.
what's it?
I think that's for sure.
It's not for sure, right? The only thing more dangerous than ignorance is certainty. And if you don't have someone near you who can tell you what you don't want to hear, you need new friends. Because you're going to need someone to tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. You might have a problem with that going on right now. Like, so, and I think of all of those as the blessings of that kind of a world. And so very often in later years, when my teacher and I were reading difficult Sanskrit texts together, philosophical texts, and he would say, well, what do you think? I would quote some other text or some other thing, and he'd go, no, I asked you what you thought. So, and then on his, as he was diagnosed with metastatic cancer in '94. And as he was dying, I said to him, oh, why me? You know, like I wasn't the best or the brightest. And he said, well, you came back. And that's a very Brahmin answer. You accepted the invitation. Like, did you want to do this? That's good. If you don't want to do this, we'll do something else. And all of his children became immensely successful, productive, lovely people, but none of them learned what he knew because they didn't ask and they didn't want it. And then I said, well, why me? And he goes, you came back. But then he looked at me and he said, I just wanted someone to talk to. So to have that rich conversation, to have an honest conversation, to have one where you can say, why would you think that? That's it. I went to my first graduate degree was in Harvard Divinity School, in what's called the MTS. And so in those days, like everyone who did world religions had to get through the divinity school. So it's like a little weird. So I'm in the back of a class on the Gospel of St. John because I have to do this stuff. And I'm constantly raising my hand going, adults think this? You know, like, because so like it's Easter and I go to a class and they're talking like this happened. And I said, the distinctive feature of the dead is that they stay that way. But furthermore, you really want them getting up. Right. So now of course, I'm just a glib YSS kid from New Jersey, right? But I think you get to ask the hard questions, even if they seem like the obvious questions. And I think that that's part of the tradition of learning that I got in India. And then I also got very sort of reinforced in the academy. The academy has let me do that. Now, I do think that there are new kinds of self-censorship all over this world that are dangerous. But I think that there can be honesty and integrity if you're willing to be uncomfortable. Someone asks you, well, why do you think that? Like, why does that matter to you? Is that a good idea? So what I thought we would do, we have 3 Wednesdays. We can do lots of things or anything we want. But so I was trained in the history of religions. And in those days, that meant like a little bit of everything and 2 master's degrees just in like the story of everything. And then you get more and more specialists. As you know, a PhD is more and more about less and less. That's got push harder, gummy, piled higher and deeper. Depends what you think those 3 letters mean. But it was in those days, it was a very kind of, even our subjects weren't very narrow. Nowadays, even in the study of religion, like if you do this, you kind of don't do that. Does that make sense? It's almost like, you know how like we used to go to the doctor and doctors did things? Now they just send you to the next specialist. Like this guy only does elbows. Like that guy only does this piece of Judaism in that part of the world. Does that make sense? Like that's what all of academia has become, that sort of world of, I think, over specialization. Because all the good conversations are really when you have at least some honest and serious exposure to a lot more than what just your interests are or your subjects are. And you never learn to generalize by learning things in general. Right? So you need example, you need specificity. You need to land somewhere. You need to know your stuff. And then the comparative project gets way more interesting. Because then you can ask what I think are the much more interesting questions. I mean, I could probably get you or your children or your grandchildren mildly interested in this, in Hinduism. If I can get them in a room, I can probably charm them into some version of this is an interesting thing to talk about. But my goal is not to, they're about to graduate, we're less than a month away. I say right to them, you're never going to remember all the facts of this class. Plus, it can't be important because nowadays it's 5 seconds away. Like, you want to know the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha? Click. Like, the almighty Google will tell you, right? So it can't be about the information. So now, on the one hand, we need competence and seriousness and people who know the facts and can go through all of that stuff without. On the other hand, we must be asking better questions because it can't just be about that. So part of the comparative project and part of kind of what I'm circling around here is I want to offer you some examples from ancient India and other sources in the next 3 weeks and really kind of ask the humanist question, which is, while these folks are not just us with a foreign accent long ago and far away, at some point they're asking the questions that all humans address. What kind of a world are we living in? How did this happen? Where do we come from? What do we do? What happens? How should we live? Hatch 'em, match 'em, and dispatch 'em. In America, I call it four-wheel religion. You know when people get religion in America? Baby carriages, limousines, ambulances, and hearse. Get any one of those four wheels around, suddenly people get religion. So, now, could folks be more curious? Could they be more involved in a richer conversation? I think they could, and I welcome that. That's, of course, my goal. My goal is to bring this to a human conversation. So when the dean comes to visit our department, you know, when everyone goes around and like, what's your research specialty? I always say, I teach literacy and I'm a humanist. So now, okay, so let's endeavor a little history. We'll read some poetry. We'll ask some interesting questions. And is that enough? That's well more than enough of an introduction, but I hope it's interesting enough to kind of get us going. So where I thought we would begin is in the oldest poetry we have from subcontinental worlds. By that I mean ancient India. To think of ancient India, first of all, don't think of political India. Think of the extent of the world from essentially what we politically would call Afghanistan today, all the way across the arc of the Himalayas, all the way to the Bay of Bengal and what is today Calcutta, and then even a bit further down into that peninsula where Malaysia is, that way into the jungles of Burma. And then, so the Indian subcontinent, of course, has the tallest mountains in the world in the north. It's surrounded on two sides by lots of ocean, 3 oceans, in fact. In fact, that's a fun story. If you go to the very, very tip of India, like, you know, how like you see it on the map and you go, there's a tip in India. If you actually stand there, so it's amazing because you know what happens? It goes like this. It's like you can actually see the subcontinent go like this. And on the beach, the sand is 3 different colors. Because if you walk up one side into the Bay of Bengal, the sand is black. If you walk the other way towards the Indian Ocean, the sand is white. And you go up the other side, and the sand is gold. I'm not even making this up. When I was a kid, there were like little kids on the beach selling you packets of sand. Like, oh, look, you see, I do things like this. You know, so anyway, so deep in South India, there are the oceans, and then there are mountains coming down both sides of the subcontinent. And then, of course, on the far eastern side, think of contemporary Calcutta, head towards the Malaysian peninsula, that side, the jungles sides. That side is as formidable a jungle barrier as any in the world. I've got great stories about about folks, Chinese pilgrims who came down over many centuries through the rivers and through the jungles of the eastern side of India. And then the western side of India is a vast desert that will take you all the way through political Pakistan. There's a sea of sand between yourself and Persia, the Iranians. But for all of the ways in which India has been this self-generative, creative phenomenon of these geographical boundaries, and has always had input and immigration and voices. There's a way over those Himalayas, and it's been done. There's a way through those jungles, and it's happened. There is a fair amount of seafaring kind of community. When I was still a kid, you could be in Kerala on the western coast of India on the beach and still find Roman coins on the beach, right? Because they were there in the first century. So there has been this enormous confluence of culture and history in India. There's a Jewish community in Kerala. We can talk about that too, which is really interesting. I know the fellow who did the kind of original research on the synagogues on the western side. That's in Kerala. It's also the place where Thomas the Doubter is said to have established his apostolic mission of first century Christianity. So there's a whole Church of St. Thomas, an Assyrian church phenomena in India that traces itself to Thomas the Doubter, my favorite one. Because doubting is a good thing, right? So the history of this conversation is remarkable. So let's start in two places. There are those people deep in South India, the today Tamil speakers, who've been there pretty much as long as there have been people, right? Because they are, again, as I said, they're genetically related to people in Papua New Guinea and Australian Aboriginals. That means they've been there before that went before plate tectonics took apart those worlds, right before the Ice Age.
They just didn't. They had seafaring.
No, that's not how it happened. We're sure of it now. So the way the genetic pushes. No, it's really old. It's as old as migration is. That's what we think.
We said migration.
Yeah, 65,000. That's before.
Goes back a long time.
Goes back a long time before. Yeah, but there is seafaring. There is those land masses have had.
It might have been much closer.
Much closer. Yeah, that's what. I mean, Australia's been drifting south forever. So millions. Anyway, that's where they are, and they've been there. So we kind of count them as and those Tamil people have a history and a literature and a culture of music and politics and religion and spirituality and literacy that goes back to about 1800 before the Christian era. And by then, and even what we see then speaks to an older world. So they've been around quite a long time. Now, right around that same period, 1800 before the Christian era, there's migration from the West. And it's the same phenomena that brings us, that spread east and west. So let's take that as a point of history. Somewhere around 5000 before the Christian era, they're in what is today the Donbass, that eastern part of Ukraine. This is where we think their origin. There were peoples who spoke a language that we as scholars call Proto-Indo-European. We consider it the mother of all the languages that belong to that family group. So to put that in the simplest terms, all of the languages from Ireland to northern India, with the exception of its outliers, the Hungarians, the Finns, the Basque people over there, they're kind of weird. There's the Kardavalian stuff, that's Georgian, and certain strange Turkish languages. But Ireland, the Ire in Ireland is the Iran in Iranian. And it is the Arya in Aryavarta, which is the ancient name of India. So let's just do that for a second. So Iran, and we call them Iranians. You know, like how easy that would be. Like if you were a neighbor of mine growing up, you would be a Hackensakian, right? But that ending, that's a grammatical ending shared in all of these languages. So if you go to, it's the genitive plural in Greek, it's the genitive plural in Sanskrit, right? So it's a grammatical marker. We don't even know, of course, that it just keeps moving and adapting and assimilating, because that's what living language does. It grows with people, it develops, and yet what happened is that in the early part of the 18th century, my scholarly ancestors made this discovery. And what they discovered were that scholars in India who had been studying the ancient poetry and the materials that later philosophically came through the people we call Brahmins, people speaking the earliest texts in a language called Vedic, and this language is, I'm translated here as Vedic, and then its subsequent language is called Sanskrit or Samskrita. Now, I'd be happy to give you a long, happy conversation about the history of those languages. It's so fascinating. But people come as migrants from, and all of us who, for whom a mother tongue belongs to that family, are in some way related to that. Now, the Semitic languages of the Middle East are not Indo-European languages. There's lots of begging, borrowing, stealing, taking, learning across these cultures. But modern day Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, the Middle Eastern, those belong to a different language family, right? And that while there's plenty of cross-pollination, the languages of the Indo-European group belong to, and there's lots and lots of Semitic origin words, Hebrew words, and other words that are in Indo-European languages, but this accounts for all of them. So around 5,000 years ago, these migrations happen east and west, and they get as far as Ireland, and they get as far as northern India. The people who arrive in northern India are part of a branch of that conversation, speaking languages we call Indic languages. The oldest of those in India is called Vedic, and the poetry I handed you today is in Vedic. Now, Vedic isn't Sanskrit. Vedic is 1,000 years older than Sanskrit. So just think about that for a second. Say we're English speakers and it's 2026. Let's go back 1,000 years. It's 1,026. And you're in England. What would English sound like? It would sound like Norse. Yeah, it would sound like Norse, right? My fourth great grandfather buried on Orkneys. Oleum den Gunnar, right? It's a Johansson. My Scottish ancestors are Viking, right? So those folks, so that language, then of course, in 1066, the England changes, and those languages that make modern English, which are the post William of Orange, 1066, the Normans come to England in 1066, that ancient English, Saxon, Germanic, Norse language gets all this stuff from Latin, right? Gets all this stuff from French, essentially, right? Old French. French is essentially mispronounced Latin. Don't tell the French that. Always remember there's the right way, the wrong way, and the French way. So, much to their credit. So, which is why we use it all the time. But we almost invariably have two words for the same things, but don't sound anything alike. Like we have Wasser, we have water. That's the Germanic. That's the Saxon side. That's the Germanic side. That'll take you to German, obviously, and Yiddish and those languages, right? Yiddish being that fantastic amalgam of Semitic language moving into German and cross-pollinating in those diaspora communities of such determination and genius, right? And then, but we also have aquatic, right? That's the Latin word, like agua in Spanish, right? So we have Latin words and Saxon words, and sorting them out is sort of my job. But that phenomena of this spread comes from one mother language. Now we're pretty sure that's the case. Pretty sure that all of the languages from Ireland to northern India that fall in this category. Again, there's lots of exceptions and strange things that go on. Like Hungarian is closer to Finnish than any other language nearby. The Basque people are a true isolate. Like that's why, like when you enter Basque Country, like you gotta go see the chiropractor because you're like, look at the word and you go, like, what the heck just happened? Like you, like, can I buy a vowel? What's going on here? You know. So, but as you trace this migration and this development of culture and history through language, this it is the case that we now know for certain that these people who spoke a language that goes back, way back, you know, past the Greeks. What happened in the 18th century is that Western scholars, creatures of the Raj, basically, who, an interesting feature that when the British colonized India, the elements of the British Raj, right, were commerce, because the Brits wanted to make a dime on it, the exploitation of commerce, right? There's the military to make sure that happens. There's the administration, and then there's the clergy, right? So there's kind of four castes moving in the British Raj from the time of the East India Company in the 1700s, when the company becomes the government, the Raj, in 1857, right? But who are those people? And that administrative class were largely Brits who came from schooling, that is to say, they were Eton Oxford types, but they didn't have the step in England, and many of them took their chance in India. And then there becomes a whole generational body of people who work out of Europe, mostly Brits, whose whole life was spent in India, and many of whom had opportunity and fortune there that they would never have had in England because of caste in England, because of the way that worked too. And a handful of interesting Jewish scholars too, because they didn't have those opportunities, landowning, all of those other issues that the British used to discriminate and exploit people. Those folks also made some time in India, and there's interesting characters who turn up in that story too. So those folks who are the administrators and district collectors and the government essentially of the British Raj, were all, you know, how did you get that job? Like, what was it like? Well, what did you study? Like, you didn't have an accounting degree. You know, you studied Thucydides and Herodotus and Seneca, right? You studied the classics. Like, that was what an education was. So then they found these folks who had this ancient culture, this ancient literature, this ancient poetry. They had all kinds of interesting issues in getting access to it because they basically didn't want to talk about it. Can we take this back even further? Because we've got also interesting first contact stories. So you'll remember Alexander of Macedon. We're old enough to remember him. 323 before the Christian era, right? Alexander the Great arrives in northwest India, right? And there are records of that event. And one of them comes through a character named Demosthenes, who leaves a fragmented text called the Indica. And he tells us about how the Greeks, who are really Macedonians, who have kind of adopted, assimilated, co-opted, exploited everything between Greece and India, you know, and of course, there's a mutiny in the Greek army in India because they had just passed through Afghanistan. So that should have been our first cue. In fact, I'll pause there. When 9/11 happened and the phones rang up and down our office, because I can manage those languages, Pashto, Urdu, right? My colleagues can manage Arabic, Persian in those days. And of course, they didn't hire any of us because we had inhaled. Because you didn't do this unless you had inhaled. It was the 60s. But so anyway, neither here nor there. That's true. But so those folks who were classicists essentially gained access, and in the early part of the 1700s, there was an immediate recognition, as Sir William Jones said in a famous paper in Bengal, there is more than a coincidental relationship between the classical languages of the West and the languages of ancient India. And he had also by that time differentiated Vedic from Sanskrit. So again, like think of over in the history of ordinary languages, it takes about 1,000 years for a language to become so different that you couldn't understand it. English is just an excellent example because it goes through all of this mosaic problem. It's all of this assimilation of words and right. About 500 years, dialects shift dramatically. People like me, comparative linguists, spend most of our lives thinking about what's the difference between a language and a dialect, right? Right? And yeah, and let me give it to you. A language is a dialect with a mom. Okay, it's like religion. Religion is a cult with a mom. That is to say, it's a critical number of people. It coalesces around a particular kind of conversation. But we're still trying to do that. Now, I'll give you another clue. You know you're in an Indo-European language, or you know you're in a particular language group when like an easy tell are numbers. Because numbers are among the most stable elements of any language. So in Hindi, modern Hindi, Northern India's native tongue, ek, do, teen, char like cuatro. See? So you can hear the numbers. If you heard that in Tamil, Dravidian language, deep South India, right? That has no relationship to this history of migration, no connection to Indo-European languages. When you hear count to 10 in Tamil, like what? Right? Again, like it sounds like, so you can't, like when you hear, that's how you, so you know. Right? That's why like when we all went to school, we got a little German, a little French, a little Spanish, somewhere in our deep subconscious set of connections, we hear things. The other things that are really interestingly stable, this is an interesting conversation, I'm really having fun with this, are not only numbers, but as you would expect, kinship terms, mother, father, right? And then interestingly, certain animals. So the Sanskrit word for owl, there's an owl, there are owls on all continents except Antarctica. How cool is that? The Sanskrit word for owl is owl. Okay? So like it's that close. In a famous moment in the great work called the Bhagavad Gita, where the hero, warrior, protagonist, Arjuna, looks to his brother-in-law, his friend, his cohort, his charioteer, who is the standing form of the incarnate God, Krishna. He says, place my chariot between the two armies where I can see those who we are about to fight. The word he uses for chariot in Sanskrit is the word ratha. Did anyone have a family member who belonged to the Rotary Club, right? Or the word Rad in German, which is the word for wheel. So these folks who migrated from Ireland to Northern India, if they didn't invent the wheel, they invented all the words we use for wheel. Axle, wheel, kuklos in Greek, chakra in Sanskrit, right? So hear the sounds, right? Kweklos in Old English, like in Beowulf, over there 1,000 years ago in English. So that whole project of sussing out comparative linguistics, etymology, syntax, all those sorts of rules about how language does its business, that became a real interest to me, because as I looked back into India and these scholars said, well, look, these Indian folk are using languages intimately related to the languages of our antiquity. And what they found, and we'll finish this up by saying the key sort of link between this is that let's do wheel. If the word in Sanskrit is chakra and the word in Greek is kuklos, and then we go to hueklos, wheel, all the way in our language, you see how it gets moving along, the sounds change, but it's connected. There's all kinds of like fastidious, uptight rules about getting that right. But in that process, what you're seeing is if Sanskrit uses this word and the Greeks use that word, and the Indian folk didn't learn it from the Greek folks, then that must mean that these two languages point to a language from which they both come. You see how it goes? So and then you keep going, and then you look at the family charts and you go, how far back can we go? Like, where do we think? So the Greek word and the Indian word are related, but they didn't learn it from each other, they didn't borrow it from each other. So where did they get it from? They both got it from some other common source. That principle guides the study of comparative linguistics.
Those common ancestors.
Yes, it's called common.
Yeah.
The word is called.
Okay, I only know the genetics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it's called cognate.
Yeah, called cognate. Those are cognate words. They're related and they're genetically related.
Yeah.
But they're not, but they didn't learn it from each other, they didn't borrow it from each other. So, and that's another part of our conversation, see how much of that is borrowed, or how that happens. Okay, so this Indic language that the migrants bring also describes the world, their ancient experience, because their ancestors from 5,000 before the Christian era to 1800, when these folks and tribes with chariots, ratas, and ashwins, equus, there's the word for horse, right? Right, equus, equine, right? That's the Latin. We go to, right? And ashwa in Sanskrit, that's the word in the Sanskrit language, same word. It's the word for horse, right? So these.
How'd we get horse?
What's that?
How'd we get horse?
Okay. You really want that lecture?
3 words.
That's in 3 words. Okay, you hear the ashwin, hear that sha sound that you hear in the H in horse, right? So that's an unvocalized, horse is an unvocalized sibilant. So instead of going sha, it goes ha, right? And how that happens is just how letters line up with other letters and how people speak, basically. You wanted the 3-sentence answer, that's it. But we can take you there. There's a wonderful book called The Horse, the Chariot. It's by a guy named David Anthony. I can send you, if you want to learn all about how these words are connected and how the migration of these languages happen, there's a readable book about it that I can point you to. That's great, good fun.
Is Pinker a good source for that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't find it very difficult to read it.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's because he's an academic. He's not writing to you.
Right.
You're a civilian.
Okay.
And
Then you've got Cavallo and Cheval.
right. And all those cuz and shuz and cuz, those all go to the Q's and shuz. You hear an equine, you hear an ashwa. Those are all what we call phonological changes. Right? So those words are all related.
And then the word for hare, it's almost like the word for horse and all.
Correct. Right. Oh, there's all, so I mean,
Caballo.
yeah, we can have the words for head. Some words are more, exactly, some words are more stable, some words are easy to trace. That process of course is called etymology. And we do plenty of that. But this first language that these folks bring also describes their ancient world, because their ancestors came from the Donbass. They came across. So if we were, that's 4,000, there's 4,000 miles of grass. If you stay north of the Pamirs, so say we were in eastern Ukraine and we took a right. Okay, think of the Western ancestors as taking a left and following the rivers. So we're in eastern Ukraine. They're going to migrate this way into Europe. They're going to go down through Anatolia, that's Turkey, right? And then you're going to end up, and so much of that early migration goes up the great rivers of Europe. The Danube, right, for example, there's a goddess in these poetry called Danus. It's named after that goddess. So these words are connected to those words. Now, by the time those folks are naming the river Danube, do they have any connection to the folks who are using the same word to describe a goddess of rivers and waters in India? No. Somewhere deep in that consciousness is this long historical linguistic connection. So it's cool, isn't it?
It's mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing, right? So these migrants, and now think about this. Like if we were in Kansas City looking left, right, fly over America, right? That's 1,000 miles, more or less, to the Continental Divide. You know, like where Nebraska, it's just corn, it's just flat grassland as far as you can see. The expanse of the grasslands of what are called the steppes, the grasslands of Central Asia are 4,000 miles. Now, if you were part of that ancient migratory culture, what are you doing for a living? And part of it is they have advanced a certain degree of, they're essentially pastoralists. So these folks are eating horses before they've domesticated them. And then they're moving various kinds of animals across huge expanses of grass. And they have a fair amount of slash and burn agriculture. Everyone knows what that is. So people settle down for a bit and they plant and they reap what they sow, but they're going to follow the weather and they're going to follow the animals and they're going to keep moving. So they're sojourning, they're not completely migratory, but eventually they get to northern India. Now, if you were in Nebraska and it's the new moon night and your phone's dead, how do you know where you are? Where do you look? Where do you look? Where's your orientation to the universe? Up, exactly. The sky, the sky. So the gods and goddesses, and mostly gods, of the Vedic world point up. They're the sky. So, and almost all the characters of the sky in Indo-European traditions, all of them, from Ireland to northern India, almost all the sky characters are encoded masculine. Almost all look down into the earth, things that come this way, right? Almost all of those characters are encoded feminine. Mother Earth. Now, when these Indic people arrive in northern India, their ancestors are the people of the sky. Their poetry talks about that. Because where does everything come from? It comes from, where's your orientation come from? How do you know where you are? What happens to you every day? Let's give you a simple example. So, and if you look up at that ancient sky in Central Asia, think of being in Kansas at night on a clear night. It looks like a vault, right? It looks like a bowl, right? And so our Vedic universe is described as the vault of the sky. The word for that is ka, K-H-A. Now, if we were thinking about Buddhism, we would say, what's the first teaching or the first principle of Buddhist thought? The first teaching of the so-called Four Truths, Buddhists make lists. So Hindus have 330 million gods, Buddhists make lists. Okay, that's yeah. My Buddhism teacher was Masatoshi Nagatomi, probably the greatest Buddhism scholar of the 20th century, if only because he was also a pretty sodic junk. But Mas was a genius. And imagine this, Religion 1701 in Emerson Hall at Harvard University. And Mas is lecturing on Buddhism, and he's writing Sanskrit, Pali, Tibetan, Prakrit, all these ancient Indian languages with his right hand. And look, I can't make this up, I have receipts. And he's doing Chinese, Japanese, and Korean with his left hand vertically, while he's screaming at the blackboard in a sound that sounds like John Belushi samurai cheeseburger. Like, no way you can understand Mas. And so Mas is screaming at the blackboard in his fantastically beautiful, dense Japanese accent. And what happens, of course, is that whoever ends up being his teaching fellow, in this case it was me, the class starts on Monday with 70 people in it. On Wednesday, we're down to 25. By Friday, the last 15 are huddled around me going, what did he say? What language is that? And I'm looking at the blackboard going, well, I know 3 of those. You know, like everybody else is just wondering what Ma said. Anyway, so let's go back to our example. We're with these ancient migratory people, right? They've got chariots, they've got horses, they've got sheep and cattle, and they're going to take their good old time, 5,000 years. They're going to take 2,500 years to reach the Indian subcontinent. They're going to look up at the sky to find their orientation, because that's where everything comes from. Right? So Now let's fast forward 500 before the Christian era. We get the historical character called Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha, the sage of the Shakya clan. We'll talk a lot about who he was. He's a tribal from Eastern India. It's not part of this migratory culture, but his culture has already been assimilated into that because he has all the attributes and he's using a language. So our historical Buddha is speaking a language that's related to Vedic, that's related to English. It goes all the way back, but his ancestors didn't. His ancestors came from the foothills of Eastern Nepal. Right? Okay, let's bear that. Now he becomes the Buddha. He's an awakened being, right? And he's going to teach, he's going to have a prolific career. The Buddha gets his big kaboom. I was thinking of the Buddhist enlightenment as sounding something like the ending of Marvin Martian. Where's the kaboom? There's supposed to be a earth shattering. Sorry, Bugs Bunny cartoon. There's a big kaboom. The Buddha wakes up. He's the Buddha, right? So, and then the famous teachings of the sermons. And the first truth of the Buddha is to look at the world with a serious, sober eye into the human condition, into the limited mortal experience of being an embodied person. Right? So the first truth of the Buddha is usually, look it up, like the Wikipedia version of it says Sarva Dukkham or Sabam Dukkham. It says all is suffering. It sounds pretty grim, but let's go to that word for suffering. Right? Because it doesn't quite really mean suffering. All is suffering, right? It doesn't quite really mean suffering. Because the word for suffering is dukkha. What's the ka? It's that ancient word for the vault of the sky, right? The word for suffering in English is, the word for suffering in Sanskrit is dukkha, bad sky. The word for happiness is when the Dalai Lama goes, may all beings be happy, he's using the Sanskrit word sukha, good sky, right? So the word for suffering is the weather. I mean, literally the weather, right? Like bad sky, bad sky, good sky, right? Which means that we live under an umbrella of inexorable conditions that we don't wholly fathom, we don't completely control. We live in a world in which causality and conditions and the way we live is going to give us certain inevitable consequences. Old age, disease, and death. It's going to make good days and bad days. Life's like the weather. That's the trick of so the word, while the translators may go to suffering, I want you to think of like just being under a vault of being in which we have to figure out what to do next. And the first claim is, if you're born human, this is what's going to happen. Right? Like, there's the story. Now, that's just the first observation. And then, of course, the Buddhists tell us, well, how do we get ourselves into that mess? And why do we feel that way? What's the cause of things going amiss? What's the cause of all this bad weather, bad sky, suffering? What's the cause of suffering? The Buddhists use the word, again, get another one of these cognate terms. The Buddhist usually says, well, the cause of suffering is desire. Again, if you look it up in Wikipedia, that's what it's going to tell you. But the word is tershna. That's the word you know as thirst. Thirst. Because now look at our kids. They're the water bottle generation, right? Because what we know is that if you're thirsty, it's too late. Get it? Like me. Because they're using a word to suggest this isn't desire, just desire. This is this uncontrollable, endemic, instinctual feeling that you can't stop it. You're thirsty, right? And the problem is, like, it's sort of like being on a diet. Like you're hungry. At some point, how do you manage that level of your needs? So the cause of suffering is that we have needs we don't control that overtake us. Those are the thirsty needs, right? Now the Buddha's going to tell us we can fix this, and then he's going to give us a path. And that's how the rest of that story goes. So, but you see how interesting it is when you go to the language, and you say, well, what do they mean all this stuff? Where you go, well, bad sky, good sky. But what happens? I mean, it's almost if the Buddhists from around here, because if you don't like the weather, wait a minute. Right? And then we've got those two seasons, winter and construction, right? And so in that ancient Buddhist world, right, your human condition is precarious, right? It's dangerous. And it's above you and all around you. Now that's a shared view that the Buddhists, 500 before the Christian era, are going to have inherited from those folks who came 1,000 years before the Buddha, which is when the people who wrote the poetry in front of you were alive. So the Buddha is already 1,000 years away from this immigration. But these people of the sky who migrate to India, who do they meet? They meet those folks in South India who've been there since ever. And what have those folks been doing? They have cultivated, they have some of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, right? They haven't been marching their cattle across the grasslands. They've been growing grass, wet paddy grass, right? Mostly rice in South India. Most of us don't know that rice is a twice planted seedling, right? It's got, you have to take it out and put it back in. Very labor intensive, right? But think of how many more calories you can create, right? What a different kind of a life it would be if you were cultivating grass in an agriculturally stable place. South India is jungly and red and plenty of room to grow. To grow the rice, right? Where these other folks came from a world that looked up. And in one of these Vedic hymns, there's a beautiful allegory about how the sky god marries Mother Earth. The people of the sky, now think of it sociologically, think of it historically. People of the sky, these migrant people, were bringing an Indo-European language, which we now call Vedic, right? Meet the people of the earth, these indigenous people, especially South Indian people, and in South India, we have the longest continuous tradition of goddesses in the world. So the rich Hindu goddess tradition comes principally through the South. There are goddesses in the Veda, but they're not particularly the focal. In South India is a goddess-centered culture. What? It's there she is. And then lots of human concerns can then really be redrawn by your orientation to the world. So if you are these migrant folk dealing with their cattle every night, living on the plain, these vast plains of grassland in Central Asia, you're looking like you're crossing all the stans. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. You hear that word stan? That's our word stand. It really is. It comes from the same verbal root that means to take a stand. The word stanu means pillar. It has to do with a place. It's what you call a place, is a stan, because it's where you take your stand. Right? So linguistically, those are all related. But once you leave the Ukraine and continue heading into Asia, as if you were headed across Central Asia to China, that's grass. Those folks came down over the passes into India. That India that they come down into is, imagine, like, my ancestors went the other way, right? So I have these Norse stock, like fourth ancestors. We told them about my fourth great grandfather buried on the Orkneys. Oh, jeez, you know where that is? It's like way out in the North Sea. Like it's like way out. Like, and I think like they went the wrong way. Like it's cold that way. Like you want to end up. So those folks ended on the Orkneys. These folks end up in India. It's warm. It's wet. It's foresty. We have really descriptions of very ancient India that doesn't look like modern India. Modern India is much devastated. They burnt down basically over the centuries. Like the climate changed dramatically. But these folks who come to this warm, wet place and they stay. Those people of the sky meet those people of the earth. Now, those people of the sky who were migrants, think of how they were living. Like they make their living moving around cattle and other animals because they're pastoral people. They spend the night. And then what happens every night is they stop. And they literally circle the wagons. Are we almost done? we should be done.
Some of us started in the late.
Okay, can I give you, I'll give you 2 more minutes,
When
okay?
did it actually start? So
Still a lot of
it's
fun.
7:15.
Yeah.
It started before.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, but can I just do 2 more minutes? So, because then then hang on to these things and we'll dive deep into the poetry next time. I just want you to know who these folks are. And where they all came from and why we might care about them. Okay, so these folks who came from the sky people, right? What did they do? They mustered cattle. They circled those wagons every night. They set up their lives. What are they going to live by? They're going to live by their resources, and what are they going to die from? Which is always an interesting question in the history of religion. What kills you? Right? Those people are going to die from predators. They're going to die from raiders. Whereas once you have civilization, those people of the earth, those goddess people, they die mostly from things you can't see, right? Pathogens, right? Disease, because they're living in groups of people. So all of these human concerns are going to be wagered out in this poetry. Because this poetry is going to talk about what it's like to live under a canopy that both nourishes you, it's the same sky, it's sukkah, it's the good sky, it's a canopy of happiness, and it's a canopy of disaster, dukkha. And what happens when you then settle down and the people of the earth have to figure out that process? And the secret of ancient India, the secret that makes them the Hindus, or what's going to become the Hindus, is this assimilation and adaptation of this migrant culture that comes and this native culture that eats. The sky gods meet the earth goddesses, and you have the beginnings of a Hindu world. The beginnings of that Hindu world are in these poems. Now, one last thing, because I can't not do it. One of the poems is to a character named Ka, not Ka. Ka is the sky. It's Ka. Ka is the question who in Sanskrit. And every verse of the hymn says, "Who is the one to whom we owe our celebrations?" Now, think Abbott and Costello. Because who is the one?
Right.
So the name of the god is who. So the whole thing's like an Abbott and Costello. That's why I was going to play the Abbott and Costello bit. So who is the one? And the answer is yes. Who is the one? But here's what I'd like to end, and where we began. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for having me. But a good conversation asks interesting questions, and it should ask questions that inform us and also discomfort us. Like, can we ask the hard questions? And what ancient India did is they turned one of the very first concepts they have of God, of the sublime, into a question. God is not the answer. God is the question we ask. That's such an interesting idea. So who is the God we should worship or consider? Yes, we should keep asking, who is that God? And to do that is to be interested in the question. And to stay interested in the question, I hope you're interested enough in the question to come back and we'll go through it, we'll read through it, we'll see what else they have to say. It's a really good story. I hope I didn't bore you too much.
When you talked about sky god
Yes,
and the Mother Earth,
yes,
the indigenous people of America talk about sky woman
yes,
and Mother Earth.
yes.
And their language, did it flow across Hawaii?
Mm.
And
No, there's the problem with the issue of indigenous North American languages is that they fall into that pattern we call isolates. So some of them are related, some of them have some genetics. What happens is these folks settle so successfully in particular places that unless they're part of a migratory movement, they settle in. So we don't find linguistic relationship between North American languages and these migrants.
But I met a man probably in 1972, Guatemala, German man, and he told me that the chief that's in those, the Maya, like Chichicastenango and Chichen Itzá, he said it's the same chi as in China, that it was related to agent.
That's an interesting claim. I'm not familiar with that.
That's what he claimed.
yeah.
So the migrants over, the last,
Yeah.
whatever, that those Asian languages were related to.
Interesting, what an interesting idea. That's sort of not really the way contemporary scholarship understands it.
He could have been just.
But you know, it's all sort of in process, right? I mean, there, so much of this, we feel pretty comfortable thinking of as facts, but facts are replaced with better facts, right? That's their purpose. But the purpose of a myth is not to compete with a fact. Myths are interpreted, facts are verified, right? So, and so when we hear stories that we consider mythic, we often use the word myth as if like pejorative, like that's a myth, as if that's a falsity, as if it's the opposite of a fact. And I want to start our conversation by saying myths are the stories we tell in order to consider a deeper truth, or often to say things that we can't otherwise say. I'm going to overstate it just for fun. Myths are lies told in the service of deeper truths. And if we take that to heart, then we don't become too captive of the literalism, like did this happen? And we can say, well, what's the meaning of this? And why does this story still matter to us? And as we sort out those facts, we'll try to figure it out. But I think that that's an important part of our consideration, because who we are the stories we tell. And how we decide to tell them and what we think they mean is going to give us identity, it's going to give us community, it's going to give us our sense of right and wrong, our ethics, it's going to speak to our souls. Thank you for your time. I hope it's been okay. I kept you a little long. I'm sorry about that. I'm bad at that.
The last 7 or 7. Everybody has their own
It's a long history of identity. Construction.
But anti-Semitic is anyone who spoke Semitic language.
Right.
Error.
Yes, and it involves, of course, the Babylonian diaspora.
Yeah.
And those folks.
So how do you explain that? What is it? It's almost, seems like a co-op.
It is.